The flight that returned after 37 years. In 1955, a passenger airplane vanished without a trace over the Atlantic Ocean. No crash. No distress signal. No bodies. Just silence. The aircraft was called Flight 914. For decades, governments denied the rumors surrounding it. Newspapers called it a myth. Historians buried the case. But in October 1992, something impossible happened. Airplane the landing. At exactly 3:17 a.m., air traffic controllers in Caracas, Venezuela detected an unknown aircraft entering restricted airspace. The radar operator frowned. The plane had no digital signature. No transponder. No identification code. Only one thing appeared on the screen. 914. The controller immediately radioed the aircraft. Unknown plane, identify yourself. Static answered first. Then a nervous male voice replied. This is Pan American Flight 914 from New York to Miami, requesting landing instructions. The control room went silent. One worker whispered. That flight disappeared in 1955. Fearful faced the impossible plane. Moments later, an old propeller aircraft emerged from the fog. It looked untouched by time. The paint was faded. The windows dusty. But the plane itself looked operational. As it landed, every airport worker stared in disbelief. Because the aircraft model had not been used in decades. The passengers. Airport staff approached carefully. Inside the windows, passengers sat completely still. Men in 1950s suits. Women wearing vintage dresses. Children asleep against the seats. None of them looked aware that 37 years had passed. And then. The captain opened the cockpit window. His face turned pale when he saw the modern airport lights. What year is this? He shouted. No one answered. Because nobody knew how to explain the truth. The black cars arrive. Before passengers could leave the plane, black government vehicles surrounded the runway. Armed officials stepped out. No badges. No names. One officer ordered. Nobody speaks to the passengers. Another whispered. The timeline breach is worse than we feared. Warning the strange discovery. As investigators entered the aircraft, they found something terrifying. Every clock inside the plane had stopped at the exact same second. 9:13 p.m. July 2, 1955. But one passenger's watch was still ticking. Slowly. Backward. Fire final scene. A little girl sitting near the rear window suddenly looked directly at an airport worker and whispered. They followed us through the storm. The lights inside the plane instantly shut off. And from deep within the darkness of the cabin, someone, or something, began walking toward the exit. End of Part 1. Police car light cliffhanger. Where was Flight 914 for 37 years? And what exactly came back with the passengers? The airport remained under lockdown. No flights were allowed to leave. No phones worked near the runway. And every person who witnessed the arrival of Flight 914 was forced to sign documents they weren't even allowed to read. But none of that mattered anymore. Because inside the aircraft, time itself no longer made sense. Airplane. The first passenger steps out. At 4:02 a.m., the cabin door finally opened. A cold wave of air rolled down the staircase, not normal cold, but something heavier. Like the temperature inside the plane belonged to another year. Another world. Airport workers stood frozen as the first passenger slowly stepped onto the runway. A tall man in a gray 1950s suit. Black polished shoes. Hat perfectly straight. Not a wrinkle on his face. Not a single sign of aging. Yet according to records, he should have been over 90 years old. Instead, he looked barely 32. Why is everyone dressed like that? The man stared at the airport lights in confusion. Cars. Radios. Electronic screens. Everything looked alien to him. Then he asked quietly. Why does this place look different? No one answered. An officer carefully approached him and asked for his name. The man reached into his pocket and handed over a Pan American boarding ticket. The paper looked old, but untouched by time. Name: Daniel Mercer. Passenger, Flight 914. Date, July 2, 1955. The officer's hand began shaking. Because Daniel Mercer had officially been declared dead 37 years earlier. Man in suit levitating. The secret investigation begins. Daniel was taken into a sealed interrogation room beneath the airport. No cameras were allowed. Only audio recording. 3 investigators entered. One of them asked the question everyone feared. Mr. Mercer, what is the last thing you remember? Daniel looked confused. Then nervous. He slowly replied. There was a storm. The room became silent. Cloud with lightning and rain. The storm beyond reality. Daniel described dark clouds surrounding the aircraft over the Atlantic Ocean. But these weren't ordinary clouds. He claimed the sky became completely black, even though it was daytime. Then came the sound. A low metallic vibration. Like thousands of voices whispering at once. Passengers began screaming. The lights failed. And outside the windows. Something enormous moved inside the storm. Not another aircraft. Something alive. Fearful face, it was watching us. Daniel's breathing became unstable as he continued. The clouds opened for a second, and I saw it. One investigator leaned forward. Saw what? Daniel's eyes filled with fear. An eye. The tape recorder suddenly malfunctioned. Static flooded the room. Then a strange voice interrupted the recording. Return the passengers. The investigators froze. Because nobody in the room had spoken. Radio the radio frequency. Meanwhile, technicians examined the aircraft's communication systems. What they found was impossible. The plane's radio was still receiving signals. From 1955. Old broadcasts echoed through the speakers. Music from the 1950s. Emergency military warnings. Voices of long-dead radio hosts. And beneath it all. Another signal repeated every 13 seconds. Gate remains open. I the passenger who disappeared. As panic spread through the airport, officials counted the passengers again. One was missing. Seat 27A. A woman named Eleanor Hayes. According to the manifest, she had never left the aircraft. Security teams searched every corridor. Every room. Nothing. Until a janitor reported seeing a woman in vintage clothing standing near a mirror in Terminal B. When officers arrived, the hallway was empty. But written on the mirror in fogged handwriting were the words. We never landed. Puzzle piece: the forgotten government file. Deep inside a classified archive in Washington, an elderly official opened a sealed document connected to Flight 914. The title read, Project Kronos. The file revealed something terrifying. Flight 914 was not the first disappearance. For decades, aircraft and ships had occasionally vanished inside electromagnetic storms. Only to return years later unchanged. But every return brought something back with them. Something the files referred to only as the observers. Warning: final scene. At sunrise, Daniel Mercer was placed inside a guarded medical room. Doctors monitored his heartbeat. Normal. Brain activity. Normal. Everything appeared human. Until one nurse noticed something horrifying on the heart monitor. Between each heartbeat, a second signal appeared. A rhythm that did not belong to a human body. Beep. Beep. Signal. Beep. Beep. Signal. Daniel slowly opened his eyes. But they no longer looked afraid. They looked aware. Then he smiled and whispered. "It knows you found us." The lights in the hospital instantly went out. And somewhere above the city, another aircraft appeared on radar. One that disappeared in 1968. The second aircraft appeared on radar at exactly 6:06 a.m. No warning. No communication. Only a blinking signal moving slowly across the Atlantic flight corridor. Inside the Caracas control tower, panic spread instantly. Because the identification number matched another missing aircraft. One that vanished in 1968. Airplane. The plane from 1968. Air traffic controllers watched in disbelief as the object approached through thick black clouds. Unlike Flight 914, this aircraft looked damaged. Burn marks covered the wings. The nose of the plane was cracked as if something enormous had grabbed it midair. And written across the side of the aircraft were strange symbols no airline recognized. One controller whispered, "What happened to these planes?" But nobody answered. Because deep down, nobody wanted the truth. The secret hidden above Earth. Inside a classified underground bunker in Washington, Project Kronos officials finally revealed the full situation. For decades, governments around the world had tracked mysterious, time storms, appearing over oceans and isolated skies. These storms were not weather phenomena. They were tears in reality itself. Temporary openings into something called the transit zone. A place existing outside normal time. A place where lost planes, ships, and people could become trapped for years while only minutes passed for them. But there was one terrifying problem. Nobody returned alone. The survivor's condition. Doctors examining the passengers from Flight 914 discovered impossible biological anomalies. Their blood showed unknown magnetic particles. Brain scans revealed synchronized neural patterns. Every passenger shared the exact same dream while sleeping. And the dream was always identical. A dark endless ocean beneath a sky with no stars. And above the water, gigantic shadow-like figures silently watching them. The passengers called them the observers. Radio Daniel Mercer remembers more. Daniel Mercer's condition worsened. Every hour, his memories became clearer. During another interrogation, he suddenly grabbed the table and shouted. The storm opened like an eye. He described the aircraft entering complete darkness. Not night. A different place entirely. Passengers screamed as the windows showed impossible things. Floating lights moving underwater in the sky. Giant structures hidden inside clouds. Silhouettes walking outside the aircraft at 30,000 feet. Then Daniel whispered something that terrified investigators most. They were waiting for us. Fearful faced the passenger in seat 27A. Meanwhile, security footage finally captured Eleanor Hayes, the missing passenger from seat 27A. She appeared walking through empty airport corridors at impossible speeds. One frame showed her standing at the end of a hallway. The next frame, she was suddenly inches from the camera. Her face pale. Eyes completely black. Then the footage distorted. Before the screen went dark, Eleanor whispered directly into the camera. The gate is opening again. Cloud with lightning and rain, the storm expands. Outside the city, people began noticing strange weather patterns. Clouds formed perfect circular spirals over the ocean. Electrical systems failed. Radios repeated voices from different decades simultaneously. And at exactly 9:13 p.m. every clock in Caracas stopped for 13 seconds. During those 13 seconds, thousands of people later reported hearing the same sound. A distant airplane engine above the clouds. Puzzle piece: the Kronos file. An agent secretly leaked classified pages from Project Kronos to investigators. The oldest document dated back to 1943. During a military experiment over the Atlantic, an entire naval convoy disappeared inside an electromagnetic storm. Only one sailor returned. When rescued, he repeated the same sentence over and over. "They observe us between the seconds." The sailor died 2 days later. But before his death, he drew a symbol identical to the markings now found on the 1968 aircraft. Final scene. Late that night, Daniel Mercer escaped containment. Security cameras followed him entering the empty Flight 914 aircraft alone. Officers surrounded the plane immediately. But before they could enter, every light on the runway shut off. The aircraft engines suddenly activated by themselves. And through the cockpit window, Daniel could be seen standing beside another figure. Tall. Motionless. Not human. Its eyes glowing faintly inside the darkness. The radio crackled one final message across every airport frequency. Observation phase complete. Then Flight 914 slowly began moving down the runway. Without a pilot. Without clearance. And without touching the ground. Flight 914 lifted into the air without ever touching the runway. No wheels moved. No engine roar echoed across the airport. The aircraft simply rose. Silent. Like gravity itself had stopped recognizing it. Every officer on the runway stood frozen as the plane disappeared directly into the storm clouds hanging above Caracas. Then all sound vanished. For 7 full seconds. The world became completely silent. The return of the signal. When the silence ended, every radio frequency in the city activated at once. Police radios. Taxi stations. Military channels. Old abandoned home radios that hadn't worked in years. All broadcasting the same distorted transmission. Gate 4 is now open. Nobody knew what Gate 4 meant. But inside the underground archives of Project Kronos, panic exploded. Because Gate 4 was never supposed to reopen. Man in suit levitating the hidden truth about Gate 4. An emergency meeting began deep beneath Washington. For the first time in decades, senior officials unlocked files marked Kronos Level Omega. The files revealed a horrifying secret. In 1954, 1 year before Flight 914 disappeared, a military research team discovered a location hidden inside an electromagnetic anomaly over the Atlantic Ocean. Not a place on Earth. A place between realities. The researchers called it the airport between worlds. According to survivors, it resembled an endless terminal existing outside time itself. Infinite hallways. Silent departure boards. Empty gates stretching forever beneath flickering lights. An aircraft arriving from different years, decades, even centuries. The lost travelers. One classified report described passengers wandering the terminal for what felt like days without aging. Some claimed they saw people wearing clothes from the 1920s. Others described soldiers from wars that hadn't happened yet. But the strangest reports all mentioned the same thing. Tall shadow-like beings watching silently near the gates. The observers. Fearful face Eleanor Hayes appears again. Back in Caracas, airport security received another emergency alert. Eleanor Hayes had been spotted again. This time standing alone at Gate 4 inside the abandoned wing of the airport. Officers rushed toward the area. But the deeper they walked into the corridor, the stranger everything became. The hallway appeared longer than before. Lights flickered unnaturally. And airport signs no longer displayed normal destinations. Instead they read 1947, 1986, 2031. Unknown. One officer whispered. This isn't our airport anymore. Fog the hallway that changed. As the team approached Gate 4, they heard airplane announcements echoing through the empty terminal. But the voices came from different decades. A woman's cheerful 1950s voice announced departures. Then a modern computerized voice interrupted. Then a language nobody recognized. The walls themselves seemed to breathe softly. And near the gate entrance, passengers began appearing out of thin air. Confused. Terrified. People from different time periods all standing together. A sailor from the 1940s. A businessman from the 1970s. A child wearing clothes with symbols no one understood. Daniel Mercer's warning. Suddenly Daniel Mercer stepped from the darkness beside Gate 4. But he looked different now. Paler. His eyes reflecting strange moving lights. One investigator shouted. Daniel, what is this place? Daniel answered quietly. It's where lost things wait. Then he pointed toward the gate doors. They were slowly opening by themselves. And behind them was not a boarding tunnel, but an endless black ocean beneath a sky filled with moving stars. Warning, the observer revealed. Something emerged from the darkness. Tall. Thin. Its body shifting like smoke underwater. No visible face. Only glowing white eyes. Every electronic device nearby immediately failed. People collapsed to their knees holding their heads as whispers filled the air. Not spoken aloud. Spoken directly inside their minds. The crossings have begun. One officer fired his weapon. The bullet froze in midair. Then slowly fell to the floor. The observer tilted its head. Almost curious. Puzzle pieced the ancient pattern. Back inside Project Chronos headquarters, researchers uncovered an impossible historical pattern. Disappearances linked to time storms had occurred for centuries. Ships vanishing in the 1700s. Trains disappearing in tunnels. Entire villages erased overnight. Every event happened near locations with unusual electromagnetic activity. And every survivor reported seeing the same glowing-eyed figures. The observers were older than modern history itself. Maybe older than humanity. Fire final scene. At Gate 4, the black ocean beyond the doorway began moving violently. Far below the surface. Gigantic shapes stirred in the darkness. Then a distant horn echoed across the endless water. An aircraft slowly emerged from the fog. But this plane was impossible. Its design didn't belong to any country. Any decade. Any known civilization. And written across its side in glowing symbols were 3 words. Final arrival approaching. The observer turned toward the terrified humans and whispered. Your world was only a waiting room. The gate opened wider. And something enormous began waking beneath the ocean. The impossible aircraft moved silently across the black ocean beyond Gate 4. No engine noise. No lights flashing. Only a deep metallic hum vibrating through the endless darkness. Everyone inside the terminal stood frozen. Because the closer the aircraft came, the colder the air became. And with every passing second, reality itself seemed weaker. Walls flickered. Ceilings distorted. Time inside the airport no longer moved normally. Some clocks spun wildly. Others melted backward. Airplane, the impossible plane lands. The unknown aircraft slowly approached the terminal gate. Its surface looked alive. Dark metal shifting like liquid beneath invisible currents. There were no airline logos. No windows. Only glowing symbols pulsing across the body of the plane like a heartbeat. Then the landing gear touched the ground. And every light inside the airport exploded at once. Darkness swallowed everything. The door opens. Emergency backup lights flickered weakly. The aircraft door began opening with a long metallic scream. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then footsteps echoed from inside the cabin. Slow. Heavy. Deliberate. The first passenger stepped out. And everyone immediately realized something terrifying. They were human. But not from this time. Fearful faced the people from tomorrow. The passengers wore strange dark uniforms with glowing lines running across the fabric. Their faces looked exhausted. Almost emotionless. Some had mechanical implants beneath their skin. Others carried devices no one recognized. But the most horrifying detail was their eyes. Every single passenger had the exact same pale glowing pupils as the observers. One woman stepped forward holding a small metallic object. She looked directly at the investigators and whispered. "You shouldn't have opened the gate. The future warning. Project Kronos agents surrounded the passengers immediately. Weapons raised. But the woman didn't react. Instead she calmly looked around the airport as if recognizing a place she had visited before. Then she asked. "What year is this?" An officer answered cautiously. 1992. The woman closed her eyes in horror. Then she whispered. "So this is where it started. Radio the message from the future." The mysterious passengers were taken into containment rooms deep beneath the airport. One of them, a man identified only as Passenger 23, finally agreed to speak. What he revealed shattered everything. He claimed they came from the year 2087. According to him, humanity eventually discovered the transit zone and tried to control it. Governments built technology capable of opening temporary gates through time. At first, it changed the world. Diseases cured. Energy unlimited. Information pulled from future centuries. But then, the observers noticed humanity interfering with the crossings. And everything collapsed. Fog, they are not travelers. Passenger 23 explained the terrifying truth about the observers. They were not aliens. Not ghosts. Not creatures. They were something far older. Entities existing outside linear time itself. To them, humanity was simply another temporary event passing through reality. And the transit zone was never meant for humans to enter. Every time you cross, Passenger 23 warned. They learn more about us. Warning the fate of the future. Investigators demanded proof. Passenger 23 silently placed a device onto the table. A holographic projection activated. Cities appeared on fire. Skies torn apart by endless black storms. Gigantic shadow-like forms moving above ruined oceans. And scattered across the world. Thousands of abandoned aircraft. Frozen in midair. As if time itself had stopped around them. Then the image zoomed closer. On one ruined building were the words. "Welcome to Gate 4. Eleanor's transformation." Meanwhile, Eleanor Hayes was no longer acting human. Security footage showed her standing motionless for hours inside the empty terminal. Then suddenly speaking in voices that didn't belong to her. Male voices. Children's voices. Languages from different countries. Different centuries. Doctors examining her discovered something impossible. Her brain activity was synchronizing with unknown radio frequencies coming from the storm above the airport. She slowly smiled and whispered. "They're arriving earlier this time." Puzzle piece: the real purpose of Flight 914. Deep inside the Kronos files, researchers uncovered one final classified truth. Flight 914 had not disappeared accidentally. It had been chosen. Certain individuals across history possessed unusual neurological patterns that allowed the observers to mark them. The passengers of Flight 914 were among the first successful human subjects capable of surviving the transit zone. They were never victims. They were experiments. Fire final scene. Late that night, alarms screamed throughout the airport. The storm above Caracas suddenly expanded across the entire sky. Thousands of people looked upward in terror. Because shapes were becoming visible inside the clouds. Massive shapes. Far larger than aircraft. Then every electronic screen across the city activated simultaneously. A single message appeared worldwide. Final arrival, 72 hours remaining. Inside Gate 4, the observer slowly turned toward Daniel Mercer. And for the first time, it spoke with a voice almost human. Prepare your species. The airport lights died completely. And above the clouds, something enormous opened its eyes. The countdown had already begun. 72 hours remaining. The message appeared on televisions, phones, military satellites, even old broken screens disconnected from power. No government could stop it. No network could shut it down. Across the world, panic spread faster than any war in human history. Because deep inside every human mind, something felt wrong. Like reality itself was waiting for something to arrive. Cloud with lightning, the storm covers the earth. Within hours, the black storm above Caracas expanded across continents. Air traffic worldwide was suspended. Thousands of flights vanished from radar for seconds at a time, then reappeared miles away from their original locations. Pilots reported impossible sights in the clouds. Endless hallways floating in the sky. Glowing gates suspended above oceans. Giant silhouettes moving behind thunderstorms. And every report ended the same way. Something is watching us. Project Kronos falls apart. Inside the underground headquarters of Project Kronos, systems began failing one by one. Classified files erased themselves. Security doors opened automatically. Even the oldest officials started disappearing without explanation. One researcher was caught on camera walking into an empty hallway. Halfway down the corridor, he simply vanished. No flash. No sound. Only static. The surviving agents realized the horrifying truth. The transit zone was no longer staying contained. It was merging with Earth. Airplane, the return of the lost flights. Then came the first wave. Aircraft missing for decades began appearing worldwide. A 1972 passenger jet landed in Tokyo with every passenger alive and unchanged. A military aircraft lost in 1944 appeared above the Atlantic before vanishing again into the clouds. A private plane from 2001 sent a distress signal from somewhere over Brazil. Its final transmission. There are gates in the sky. Governments could no longer hide the truth. The world was witnessing the impossible in real time. Man in suit levitating, Daniel Mercer changes. Meanwhile, Daniel Mercer was becoming something else. His heartbeat no longer matched human rhythms. His eyes reflected moving stars even in complete darkness. Doctors discovered strange markings spreading beneath his skin like glowing veins. When questioned, Daniel calmly said, "I can hear the transit zone now." An investigator asked, "What is it saying?" Daniel smiled weakly. "It says the door was never closed." Fog. Eleanor Hayes opens the gate. At Gate 4, Eleanor Hayes stood motionless before the endless black ocean. The observer remained beside her silently. Then Eleanor slowly raised her hand. And the ocean began to rise. Not water. Darkness itself. It climbed upward like living smoke, twisting into enormous spiral shapes above the terminal. Suddenly thousands of voices echoed through the airport simultaneously. Final arrival approaching. The floor beneath Gate 4 cracked open. And beneath the terminal, something gigantic moved. Fearful faced the secret buried under the airport. Ancient blueprints hidden within Project Kronos archives revealed a terrifying fact. The Caracas airport had not been built randomly. It stood directly above a natural, thin point between realities. For centuries, civilizations unknowingly built structures there. Temples. Lighthouses. Military bases. Every structure eventually vanished mysteriously. The location had always been a gateway. And humanity had accidentally reopened it. The broadcast from beyond. At exactly midnight, every screen on Earth turned black. Then a live image appeared. A massive terminal stretching endlessly into darkness. Thousands of silent passengers standing beneath flickering lights. Aircraft arriving from impossible eras. And at the center of it all, a colossal shadow towering above the gates. Too large to fully see. Too unnatural for the human mind to understand. Then the broadcast focused on its glowing eyes. And a voice echoed worldwide. You crossed first. People everywhere collapsed in fear. Because the voice wasn't heard through speakers. It spoke directly inside human thoughts. Passenger 23 reveals the final truth. Back in containment, Passenger 23 finally confessed why the future humans returned. They were not explorers. They were survivors. In 2087, humanity lost the war against the observers. Not through violence. But through replacement. The observers learned how to copy human consciousness. Memories. Voices. Identities. By the end, nobody knew who was still human anymore. Passenger 23 whispered. The invasion already happened in our timeline. Then he looked toward the storm outside. And now it's happening earlier. Warning final scene. As the final 48-hour countdown began, the skies above Earth split open completely. Massive glowing gates appeared across the clouds worldwide. And from inside them, aircraft slowly emerged. Hundreds of them. Planes from different decades. Different countries. Different timelines. All flying silently toward Earth. But one aircraft flew ahead of the others. Larger. Darker. Its body covered in the same glowing symbols seen inside the transit zone. And on its front was a symbol Project Kronos feared more than anything. The mark of the first observer. Daniel Mercer stared upward in terror and whispered. That's not a plane. The object moved beneath the clouds. And the entire world realized something horrifying. It was alive. The sky no longer belonged to Earth. Across every continent, the massive glowing gates hung above cities like wounds torn into reality itself. Inside them, aircraft drifted silently through endless darkness. Some were ancient. Some impossibly futuristic. And some were not built by humans at all. Milky Way. The first observer descends. The living aircraft carrying the symbol I moved slowly beneath the clouds. Its surface shifted constantly, like metal trying to imitate flesh. People worldwide watched in horror as it blocked entire sections of the sky. No sound came from it. No engines. Only a low vibration felt directly inside the chest. Then suddenly, every clock on Earth stopped. Phones froze. Satellites shut down. Human speech itself became distorted for several terrifying seconds. Because time had begun collapsing unevenly across the planet. Hourglass not done, the time fractures begin. Entire cities started experiencing impossible events. In London, people witnessed day and night changing every few minutes. In Tokyo, trains arrived carrying passengers who had disappeared years earlier. In Brazil, an abandoned airport appeared in the middle of the jungle for exactly 13 minutes, then vanished again. And in parts of the Atlantic Ocean, ships reported seeing enormous terminals floating above the water. The airport between worlds was bleeding into reality. They're rewriting time. Inside Project Kronos headquarters, the remaining scientists finally understood the true purpose of the observers. They were not invading Earth. They were reorganizing it. To the observers, time was not fixed. It was a structure that could be edited, erased, and rebuilt. Human history itself was being rewritten in real time. One scientist screamed. "They're turning our reality into another transit zone." Flight 914 returns again. Then radar detected something impossible. Flight 914 had reappeared above Caracas. But this time it wasn't alone. Behind it flew hundreds of identical aircraft stretching across the clouds endlessly like reflections in a mirror. Each carried different passengers from different timelines. Some passengers stared out helplessly. Others stood motionless with glowing eyes. And some seats were occupied by things that were never human. Man in suit levitating. Daniel Mercer's awakening. Daniel Mercer collapsed suddenly as strange symbols spread across his skin completely. Doctors tried to restrain him, but his body temperature dropped below freezing. Then every monitor inside the room exploded. Daniel slowly floated upward from the hospital bed. His eyes filled with moving galaxies. And when he spoke, multiple voices spoke with him. The first observer remembers this world. The walls around him distorted like liquid. For a brief moment, investigators saw another place overlapping reality. The endless terminal. Infinite gates. Millions of silent passengers waiting beneath black skies. Fog. Eleanor Hayes crosses over. At Gate 4, Eleanor Hayes walked directly into the black ocean beyond the terminal doorway. But instead of sinking, she kept walking across the dark surface. The observer beside her stopped at the edge. Almost respectfully. Then Eleanor turned back one final time. Except she no longer looked human. Her face shifted constantly between different ages and identities. Children. Adults. Elderly strangers. As though countless memories existed inside her simultaneously. She whispered. "We were never passengers." Then disappeared into the darkness. Fearful face. The world forgets. As the gates widened, humanity began losing memories. People forgot loved ones. Forgot cities. Forgot pieces of their own lives. Entire historical events vanished from books overnight. Photos changed. Maps shifted. Even digital records rewrote themselves. Project Kronos agents discovered something terrifying. The observers were feeding on human continuity itself. Every altered memory strengthened the transit zone. Radio. The last global broadcast. With governments collapsing worldwide, one emergency broadcast reached every remaining screen. Passenger 23 appeared weak and exhausted. Behind him, alarms screamed inside the Kronos bunker. He delivered humanity's final warning. If the first observer fully enters our reality, time will stop behaving permanently. He explained that the observers did not destroy civilizations physically. They erased them gradually from existence. Not death. Removal. As if humanity had never happened at all. Then Passenger 23 revealed the worst truth yet. This has happened before. Puzzle piece. The ancient civilization. Kronos archives uncovered evidence of an advanced civilization existing thousands of years before recorded history. A civilization that suddenly vanished without trace. No ruins. No bodies. Only strange symbols buried beneath oceans and deserts. The same symbols now appearing across the sky. Humanity was not the first species to discover the transit zone. Just the latest. Warning. Final scene. The first observer finally descended beneath the clouds over the Atlantic Ocean. People across the world watched the live stream in terror. The living aircraft unfolded slowly. Not into machinery, but into something biological. An impossibly gigantic entity emerging from inside itself. Its glowing eyes opened across the storm-covered sky. And all of humanity heard the same sentence inside their minds. Your timeline is unstable. Then the oceans below it began rising unnaturally toward the sky. Flight 914 circled silently above the giant entity. And inside the cockpit, Daniel Mercer was no longer alone. Dozens of shadow figures now stood behind him motionless. Watching Earth. Waiting. The world was no longer collapsing through destruction. It was collapsing through forgetting. Entire cities woke up unable to remember their own names. Families stared at each other like strangers. Children pointed at photographs of their parents and asked, "Who are these people?" The observers were not attacking humanity's bodies. They were erasing humanity's memory of itself. And every forgotten memory made the sky darker. Milky Way, the day history changed. At exactly 11:11 a.m. Universal Time Coordinated, something impossible happened. Millions of books across the world changed simultaneously. Libraries reported entire chapters disappearing. Historical dates rewrote themselves overnight. Wars vanished from records. Countries appeared under different names. Even the internet became unstable. Searches for famous people returned no results. It was as though reality itself was being edited live. Project Kronos discovers the truth. Deep underground, the surviving members of Project Kronos made one final discovery. The transit zone was not just a place between worlds. It was a storage system. A living archive built by the observers to preserve timelines they considered useful. Every civilization that entered the transit zone eventually became data. Memories. Patterns. Echoes trapped forever between seconds. One scientist whispered in horror. "They don't conquer worlds, they collect them." Airplane, the real purpose of Flight 914. Daniel Mercer finally revealed why Flight 914 had been chosen in 1955. The passengers unknowingly carried a rare neurological frequency. Their minds could survive contact with the transit zone without immediately breaking apart. To the observers, they were perfect containers. Not prisoners. Seeds. The beginning of a slow transformation of humanity itself. The first human observer. Inside the endless terminal, Eleanor Hayes continued changing. Her body flickered between human and shadow-like forms. Memories from thousands of lives flowed through her mind simultaneously. Then the first observer approached her. For the first time, it spoke directly in a voice that sounded almost gentle. "You understand now." Eleanor looked toward the endless gates filled with trapped passengers from forgotten timelines. Then she asked, "Why do you erase us?" The first observer answered. "Because your species destroys every timeline it touches." Fearful face, the future catastrophe revealed. Passenger 23 finally confessed the hidden event that doomed humanity in his timeline. In 2087, humans attempted to weaponize the transit zone. Governments created experiments capable of rewriting historical events. Wars were erased. Economies manipulated. Entire populations altered retroactively. At first, humanity celebrated. Until reality itself became unstable. Time fractures spread across Earth. Millions disappeared from existence overnight. The observers returned only after humanity had already broken the natural structure of time. Passenger 23 whispered. "We created the collapse ourselves." Fog, the memory storms. Across Earth, strange storms began sweeping through cities. Not storms of rain or lightning. Storms of memory. People caught inside them suddenly remembered lives they had never lived. Different families. Alternate histories. Destroyed futures. Worlds where Earth no longer existed. Some victims aged rapidly. Others forgot language completely. And some simply vanished mid-sentence. Leaving behind only shadows burned onto walls. Radio, the broadcast from the terminal. Then every screen on Earth activated again. This time humanity saw the airport between worlds clearly for the first time. Millions of passengers wandered beneath endless flickering lights. Some looked human. Others no longer did. Ancient aircraft floated silently above impossible oceans. And at the center stood Eleanor Hayes beside the first observer. She looked directly into the broadcast camera. Then spoke to the world. "You still think this is an invasion?" She paused. "It's an evacuation. The hidden human history. Project Kronos uncovered humanity's oldest secret. Thousands of years ago, an advanced civilization discovered the transit zone for the first time. They attempted to escape death itself by preserving consciousness between timelines. Instead, they triggered the first collapse. The observers were not the creators of the transit zone. They were its caretakers. And humanity had repeated the same mistake again. Warning: Daniel Mercer makes a choice. Daniel realized something horrifying. The first observer was preparing to permanently merge Earth with the transit zone. Once complete, humanity would survive only as memory echoes trapped forever between realities. But Daniel also discovered something unexpected. The observers feared one thing: human unpredictability. Unlike other species, humans constantly changed timelines through emotion, choice, and imagination. Humanity was unstable. Because it could alter reality itself. And that made humans dangerous even to beings beyond time. Final scene. As the memory storms consumed more cities, the sky above Earth cracked open completely. The endless terminal became visible across the clouds. People around the world could now see the infinite gate stretching into darkness. Then one gate slowly illuminated brighter than all the others. Gate 13. An announcement echoed across every screen, every radio, every human mind. Final transfer initiating. Inside Gate 13 stood billions of shadow-like figures waiting silently. And among them, passengers from every lost flight in history. Daniel Mercer stared upward in horror as Flight 914 slowly moved toward the glowing gate. Then the first observer turned toward Earth one final time and asked, "Will your species choose memory, or freedom?" The gate began opening wider. And something ancient started waking behind it. Gate 13 continued opening above Earth. Not in one place. Everywhere. Across oceans, deserts, cities, and skies, the massive glowing gate stretched across the atmosphere like a wound in reality itself. People everywhere stared upward in silence. Because beyond the gate, they could see impossible things moving. Entire worlds drifting in darkness. Broken timelines floating like shattered mirrors. And among them, Earths that had already died. Milky Way: the truth behind Gate 13. Inside Project Kronos headquarters, the final classified files unlocked automatically. No passwords. No security clearance. As if the system itself wanted humanity to know the truth before the end. The files revealed that Gate 13 was not just another portal. It was the final archive. The place where collapsing timelines were stored before permanent deletion. Every civilization that failed to stabilize reality eventually arrived there. Frozen forever as echoes. Humanity was becoming the next entry. The Earths beyond the gate. Astronomers observing Gate 13 saw horrifying visions inside the opening. Cities swallowed by black oceans. Skies filled with abandoned aircraft. Ruined versions of Earth orbiting dead stars. Human beings wandering endlessly through terminals with no exits. One scientist broke down crying after seeing a version of Earth completely empty except for millions of clocks ticking backward. Then the feed suddenly zoomed inward. And everyone watching realized the terrible truth. Some of the ruined Earths were future versions of their own world. Airplane Flight 914 crosses the sky. Flight 914 moved slowly toward Gate 13 like it was being called home. Behind it followed countless other lost aircraft from history. Planes from different decades. Different countries. Different timelines. The skies became crowded with ghosts of vanished journeys. And inside every cockpit, passengers stared silently downward with glowing eyes. Watching humanity. Waiting. Man in suit levitating. Daniel Mercer learns the final secret. Daniel Mercer could now hear the transit zone completely. Every lost voice. Every erased memory. Every broken timeline whispering together inside his mind. Then suddenly, he saw the truth. The observers were not trying to destroy humanity. They were trying to stop something worse. Deep beyond Gate 13 existed a force older than the transit zone itself. Something even the observers feared. Something responsible for consuming unstable realities once timelines collapsed beyond repair. The observers called it. The silence is coming. Passenger 23 explained what happened in the future timeline. When humanity experimented with rewriting time, they weakened reality so badly that the silence noticed Earth. Entire timelines vanished instantly. Not erased. Consumed. The observers began collecting endangered civilizations inside the transit zone to preserve what remained of them before the silence arrived. Earth's transfer into Gate 13 was never meant as punishment. It was rescue. But rescue came with a terrible cost. Humanity would survive only as preserved memory echoes outside normal existence forever. Fog. Eleanor Hayes remembers everything. Inside the endless terminal, Eleanor Hayes finally recovered all memories from every timeline she had touched. She remembered countless alternate Earths. Worlds destroyed by war. Worlds consumed by storms. Worlds where humans disappeared before inventing flight. And in every timeline, the silence eventually came. She turned toward the first observer and asked. Worlds consumed by storms. Worlds where humans disappeared before inventing flight. And in every timeline, the silence eventually came. She turned toward the first observer and asked. Has anyone ever escaped it? For the first time, the giant entity hesitated. Then answered softly. One species tried. Eleanor whispered. What happened to them? The observer's glowing eyes dimmed slightly. They became the silence. Radio. The last broadcast to humanity. The skies darkened worldwide as the final transfer accelerated. Then Daniel Mercer hijacked every remaining global broadcast. His face appeared across every screen on Earth. But his eyes no longer looked fully human. Galaxies moved inside them. Still, his voice remained calm. Humanity has one final choice. He explained that the transit zone could preserve humanity's existence. But if humans refused transfer and stayed in collapsing reality, the silence would eventually erase Earth completely. No memory. No history. Nothing. Then Daniel said something unexpected. But there may be another way. The human anomaly. Project Kronos made one final discovery. Humans possessed a unique trait unseen in other intelligent species. Imagination. Not creativity. Actual reality-altering imagination. Human consciousness naturally generated unpredictable timelines through belief, emotion, and memory. That instability terrified the observers. Because it meant humanity might be capable of something impossible. Creating a brand new timeline. One that even the silence could not predict. Warning. Final scene. As Gate 13 opened fully, the endless terminal stretched across the entire sky. Billions of shadow-like passengers stood waiting beneath its lights. The first observer descended over the Atlantic Ocean, massive enough to darken the horizon itself. Then suddenly, all broadcasts cut out. All sound vanished. Even the wind stopped. Because something had appeared behind Gate 13. At first it looked like darkness. Then people realized the darkness was moving. An enormous shape without form. Without eyes. Without light. Reality itself began disappearing wherever it moved. Stars vanished behind it. Aircraft dissolved silently into nothing. The first observer looked upward for the first time in fear. And every human on Earth heard the same whisper inside their minds. The silence has found you. Gate 13 trembled violently. Flight 914 stopped in midair. And Daniel Mercer whispered one final sentence. Now we discover if humanity was the mistake. Or the answer. The silence entered reality without sound. Without movement. Without warning. It did not arrive like a creature. It arrived like absence itself. Wherever it spread, existence simply stopped. Clouds disappeared. Stars vanished. Entire sections of the sky became empty black voids where reality no longer existed. And for the first time since humanity discovered the transit zone, the observers were afraid. Milky Way, the collapse of Gate 13. Gate 13 trembled violently above Earth. The endless terminal flickered between existence and nothingness. Millions of trapped memory echoes began fading. Passengers from lost timelines looked upward in terror as the black void spread through the gates. The first observer raised its enormous form toward the silence. Then humanity heard its true voice for the very first time. It has awakened too early. The final truth about the silence. Inside the collapsing Kronos headquarters, Passenger 23 revealed the oldest secret in existence. Long before humanity. Long before the observers. There had once been another civilization powerful enough to manipulate timelines freely. They believed they could escape death by removing pain, chaos, and unpredictability from reality itself. To create a perfect eternal existence. But in doing so, they erased everything that made consciousness alive. Emotion. Choice. Imagination. Change. The result became the silence. A living void that consumed unstable realities until only emptiness remained. It did not hate life. It simply erased anything imperfect. Airplane Flight 914 makes its final journey. Above the Atlantic Ocean, Flight 914 remained frozen in midair before Gate 13. Inside the cockpit, Daniel Mercer stared into the growing void. Around him stood shadow-like passengers from countless lost timelines. Waiting. Watching. Then Daniel finally understood why Flight 914 had returned after 37 years. Not as a warning. As a test. Humanity had been observed for decades to answer one question. Could humans create hope strong enough to resist oblivion? Fog. Eleanor Hayes chooses humanity. Inside the endless terminal, Eleanor Hayes stood beside the first observer as the silence consumed entire gates behind them. The observer turned toward her. Your species is unstable, it said. Eleanor nodded slowly. Yes. Then she looked toward Earth below. People holding each other in fear. Families refusing to forget one another. Children drawing pictures of skies that no longer existed. Millions choosing memory even while reality collapsed around them. Eleanor smiled faintly. That's why we survive. Brain, the human signal. At that moment, something impossible happened. Across Earth, human thoughts began synchronizing. Not through technology. Through memory. People everywhere started remembering the same things together. Loved ones. Childhood moments. Music. Dreams. Stories. And the stronger those memories became, the weaker the silence appeared. Project Kronos scientists realized the impossible truth. Human imagination generated reality-stabilizing patterns. The very unpredictability the observers feared was the one thing capable of resisting total erasure. Radio. Daniel Mercer's final broadcast. Daniel activated the last remaining frequency connected to every aircraft and radio tower on Earth. His voice echoed worldwide. Don't let the world become empty. Then he gave humanity one final instruction. Remember each other. Around the planet, people began speaking names aloud. Families repeated memories together. Crowds gathered in cities telling stories to strangers. And slowly, reality stopped collapsing. The observer's decision. The first observer watched humanity carefully as the silence hesitated for the first time. Then the giant entity finally understood something it had never understood before. Imperfection was not weakness. It was survival. The observers had spent eternity preserving dead timelines. But humanity created living ones. For the first time in countless ages. The observers chose not to archive Earth. They chose to protect it. Warning the last confrontation. The silence expanded across the stars one final time. Reality trembled. Gate 13 began collapsing completely. Then every lost aircraft across the skies turned toward the void simultaneously. Flight 914 led them all. Hundreds of planes from broken timelines accelerated directly into the growing darkness. Daniel Mercer looked back toward Earth one final time and smiled. Then Flight 914 disappeared into the silence. Followed by every lost flight behind it. The void shook violently. And for one impossible moment, the universe became silent. Sunrise the morning after. The next morning, the skies were clear. The gates were gone. The storms had vanished. Most of humanity remembered only fragments of what happened. Like a fading dream. Project Chronos facilities were found abandoned. No trace of the observers remained. And Flight 914 was never seen again. But strange things still happen sometimes. Radios playing voices from nowhere. Clocks stopping at 9:13 p.m. Passengers appearing briefly in empty terminals. And occasionally, on stormy nights over the Atlantic, pilots still report seeing an old aircraft flying silently inside the clouds. Waiting. Watching.